So very clearly, one of the things that is being discussed and debated is that, from a government perspective, is it worthwhile? It's just a question that that we're all thinking, and we come down to some specific areas. Is it worthwhile to look at government actually specifically investing in pre and post, and will that make life of training providers or the life of a learner much easier? Going forward, that he'll be able to will end up paying money himself if both these sides are taken care of. So this is one thinking. So let me just start with the first question I'll raise it to ma'am, is that we saw a whole host of such assets which are available with the government already, which is the pre and post infrastructure. What are your thoughts on how can some of these or all of these get released to the private sector? So is there a way that the private sector can start leveraging some of these assets, so that a lot of problems that you found the first session companies facing, is there a way to access this, and is there a way to, and if like in AP, if that can happen, can that get replicated across?
I think we are not averse to, I think the mic is not. We are not averse to encouraging private sector take up this role. But see, as we have seen even in the training space, there is a limited presence of the private training providers. And I think any private agency must look at it as a revenue or as an opportunity for making some profit, if not immediately in the short term. So if there are models, we are definitely willing to explore. Say, just as in the case of, again, the training, now we have a very good design to identify and then screen and then assign them tasks based on their capability, experience, size, so on and so forth. So if there are such offers from the private sector in the pre and post placement areas, so definitely we will be willing to not only take up but also provide whatever government infrastructure that is there. See, even in the case of training, again, there are a number of government buildings which are given to the private providers for running their training centers. So similarly, you need some space, or you need whatever government has, definitely will be willing to provide, and it's a good model in case if they come forward, because it's not possible for the government to go on delivering everything, and we open a space, and then we show some design, and then there is a model, and there are takers in the private sector. Certainly there will.
We've actually seen this working very well from a training perspective. So there's a lot of infrastructure that the government has, and there is a lot of access that the private companies have to these, because if you take a government project, the government comes and offers you centers and all that. But we've never seen something working from a pre and post asset infrastructure perspective, which they are all along saying right from the morning that such a critical component those two are to the whole training ecosystem working, that if there's a mechanism that is available to all of us and all the training partners, saying that counseling is happening, and that brings in students. And once they train well, there's an employment portal available which works effectively and creates jobs. Not just jobs, but sustainable jobs. All the tracking mechanisms that you talked about. I think there's a great model, in that. So it's nice to hear that such a thing is possible. So if there are mechanisms, then it'll be very useful for companies. Any thoughts on this? Any
one question?
Yeah.
What seems from presentation, like Andhra government is doing anyways a lot of work in terms of pre-training and post-training infrastructure. Rajesh and even Niti are running employment exchanges and working in the support infrastructure space. So in spite of having two players, for example, at least in Andhra everything should work, right? So that's what I'm trying to understand. Like, why is it still not working? Like, if somebody's paying for counseling, somebody's paying for student mobilization, somebody's paying to give you a database of list of students, and somebody else is actually connecting you to the recruiters, and everything is falling in place. We just have to train. So even then, why is it so expensive to acquire students?
No.
Let's look at it from a broader perspective. We have two kinds of issues. One is a frictional unemployment, and other is a structural unemployment issue. An employment exchange, or this kind of training what is being done right now, addresses a frictional side. What's a frictional unemployment? Frictional unemployment is coming in from the fact that the guy doesn't know where to go. He doesn't have the information to access to a job. He needs last mile intervention, 3 months, 2 months, etc. employment exchange, what KVSTDC or in terms of various other people are doing is, out of their 60 exchanges or 40 exchanges, they are doing public-private partnerships to address the frictional unemployment side. So they pay you for getting themselves last mile trained. They don't pay you for a 1-year training or a 2-year kind of a training. They pay you reimburse the salaries of the people which is being put in, and so that these employment exchange can go to the schools or go to the colleges, take over the placement cell, educate them and place them. But what is the problem here is we need to address the problem is a structural side, and structural side is not going to be answered with a 3-month or a 6-month. It has to be, the problem is of 1 year, 2 year, 3 year kind of an intervention. That what is happening in the mobilization side is parents come back and ask, कौन सा university से degree देगा? कौन सा, I mean, because this degree is, somebody was mentioning, in the marriage market, that's a very, very critical aspect. Certification has no value. Then it is the matter of how we are able to give higher education, or in terms of putting it in and bringing in a national open school or getting into a diploma and other things. It's a different ballgame. And I don't think we have addressed that all the 3 E's of education, employability or employment, what you're talking about, in a holistic way. Even at, I mean, I'm not saying Dream is bad or this, we have never tried to address. Who will give credits today? Nobody gives credits to a career launcher or an NIT and other things from a university. So it requires a holistic view, and that is clearly missing. Right from NSDC, if somebody is there, they have, if all of us are culprits in terms of putting this in terms of a single bucket solution.
Yeah, so Rajesh, good points actually. So, and I'm just holding on to the credit transfer point, because I think that's itself is a good discussion to have a little later. So I just want to move quickly, because you talked about, you know, employment exchanges, right? You talked about livelihood centers, right? And this is something that, you know, IRIS and the government together in some wonderful PPP models are, you know, are doing. Can you just talk about some of those concepts?
So there are, one is in terms of a segment which is for the formal people, that is graduates and above. We call it as a job store. A job store is nothing but for graduates and above to get background verified job and other things. With the government kind of a PPP, that's fully, there is no funding out there. I mean, we put in infrastructure, we do the everything. In the government segment, what is happening is government is giving us the infrastructure in terms of the space, in terms of the activities. The design of those employment exchanges, what we're having is really ultra. Like you have a counseling room, you have an assessment room, you have all those of things. Government spaces for the assessment, they reimburse maybe 40, 50 rupees or whatever it is. The government also reimburses the salary of the people who is getting involved. What we bring into the table is the softer side of it. One, the jobs, one, the matching system, the IT platforms. What we bring into the table is the ability to assess or ability to put them into buckets and give them jobs. That is what is being given. But the problem what we have faced after doing this with government PPPs and other things is still people walk into these places thinking of a government job. So we are struggling in terms of the footfalls and other things is still a problem. So then we devised a model called as livelihood centers. I mean, what we do is these MPs, MLAs and other people have a lot of funds with them. So we tried looking at them in terms of saying that, okay, can we put up a livelihood center at, in Bangalore, from Bangalore 100 kilometers away is a place called Siddhalghat. It's a rural village, where we look at self-employment as a model. So here, instead of government, a semi-government or these kind of people facilitate, but the jobs given there is like for a self-employment. Like we work with Godrej and Boys or Snyder there. What we do is Snyder's CSR funds provides us with the electrical lab and facilities. The local SHGs and other things help us to get the people there. We put the trainers and other things to get trained, and finally they are self-employed. We work with Godrej and Boys, those kind of people for their beauty care kind of a thing. These are done through various partners. So that is hitting the bottom end, middle end through the PPP of employment exchange, job stores. This way, like what Meera was talking about, there is a different business model which we need to create at the acquisition side. And that's what the attempt with this PPP and other things we're trying to do.
Right.
Yes.
One comment on pre and post, and taking a clue from what Meera said very, very correctly, that these two being very critical areas, pre and post, and she said that these two itself can become a large industry, and we see that, you know, it can be outsourced. That's one comment. Second comment, if you really see, what you're trying to do is there are two models. One is, on one hand, core competencies of the training provider is what? Perhaps content, curriculum, assessment, certification, batch operations, running the training centers. right? So here what we are doing today is training providers, which is the middle vertical, which is the core competency, on one hand are trying to do something on pre and post, which is not the core competency. On the second hand, we have a remap model, which again is trying to do all three. So you look at the key stakeholders, I mean, we just see, I mean, one key stakeholder, if I really say, are missing is industry, and which comes out very, very clearly. I think government is showing, and they've shown actually, done a commitment on the table. Training providers have done a commitment on the table. Industries are completely missing even from a session like this, and you go to any CI or Wiki forum as far as this space is concerned. And between these two stakeholders who put money and commitment on the table, again, perhaps both of us are trying to do all three together, and if we synergize, and if we look at like a, same remap kind of a model, why don't we take pre-portion, perhaps government is in the best position to address, middle vertical in your slide, which is that trainers, that's training providers are best. So if each person takes care of their core competency, and the post is basically to be done by industry, which neither government or training providers can do effectively.
Perfect.
So why don't we look at that kind of model?
Talked about, right?
Yeah.
How training companies are so stressed trying to do all three, right? So if you go into a government or tender, you have to do all three, right? You have to source, you have to train, you have to place. By the time you reach placement, you are so fatigued and and dead, you don't get your money, the whole thing becomes unprofitable. So absolutely right. So I'm going to move that. Sorry, Sanjay, you have.
Yeah, so taking on from our session as well. Okay, the training provider is ending up being the fall guy. So he's taking care of everything. And all I'm saying is, I think you're very right, Sanjay. You said that the government's playing its role and doing whatever best, and we're not seeing really the demand side of it happening. Government's willing to give infrastructure. In Punjab, I've got government giving me schools. He says use these municipal schools. Not a problem at all. Karo training. Okay. And it's at 15 rupees per hour per student and so on and so forth. So that's okay, that's fine, okay. That can always be debated. But then, the issue is who goes and creates someone has to create the jobs. In Phagwara, I'm doing training, I do close to about 700 a year. But where do we get them jobs from?
Right. So we call ourselves full service providers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
starting to become, no service provider, because by the time you reach the last mile of the service,
So Nimesh, the other thing I think, like ma'am mentioned and Rajesh also mentioned, I think there are multiple models that have to operate and all running parallel and connecting to some places in the target audience and so on and so forth. So B2G, B2B, B2C, all of them sort of, okay. And somewhere there is a fine line. B2G actually is, I think, from our experience, can be placed a little at a distance. While B2B and B2C, there can be good jugalbandi between these two.
So are we really talking about how to incent companies to recruit more aggressively? I mean, if that is what it is it a tax break issue? Is it some kind of incentive issue that?
Yeah, Shantu. So I'm going to, that's one of the things that, one example that Rajesh gave about how ESI, PF breaks are given in, say, Rajasthan to actually incentivize. Yeah, to actually do this.
Is the regulation of working conditions.
That's the other one, right? So
lots of candidates work 12 hours for 5,000, which puts them off.
Correct.
So none of the players are looking at these kind of working conditions where the government has a big role to play in terms of regulation.
Then issues like internship, apprenticeship acts, there are a couple of those things.
I think the cost of business, that's a good example. I think the challenge there is that if you start to play with the cost of doing business for companies, the other problems will happen, right? People start to migrate to geographies where they find it easier to operate.
Correct.
But I think direct incentives to encourage companies to recruit people from these models
It'd be very useful.
might be much more effective in short term, right? Because then there is a real break. The example that you gave, I think, was excellent. That then companies start to see real value.
I agree completely.
Like for example, we have these tax incentives at times for corporate training, for senior management and others, where government gives tax for training. Ideally, that tax break is required at the lower end for the company rather than at the top end.
The whole issue is who owns this, right? So who's going to drive industry? We're finding industry such a difficult player to work with, from all aspects. And as rightfully somebody said, we don't even have industry. If CI conference, forget about what we're doing here. I mean, they don't come. They don't even kind of, and that's such a critical player. So I'm going to kind of move this to another area which I'm going to get Meera to talk to us about. All the work that she's always been doing. I'll just come back, please. Been very fascinated by all the work she's been doing in the past. So, Meera, we've got this 50,000, 100,000 people coming out of these government systems, and ma'am also talked about the scale. So, right? So where are those? How do you create those, those jobs? And from your experience of EGMM, etc., what do you see as the issues and challenges there?
As I said, most of the trainings which we've done are all free, and I think it's also done free for 2-3 reasons. One is because government has large targets, so unless the whole ecosphere has a similar yardstick for all, that means all youth should pay, all government departments should force that the youth should pay and the companies should pay. Unless a similar yardstick is done, this kind of a revenue model cannot be built. That's very clear about it.
So who do you think
For
should
example,
drive an ecosystem like that?
I think
there has to be some owner who...
Yeah, definitely the government. It's the largest funder. So definitely the government. I think one of the problems we have is currently we have the LSDC, which is trying to build funding training organizations, which are trying to build a business model. And then we have a lot of government departments, which are, actually doing a grant-based model. And quite often, you also have some of the NSDC partners who are working in the same space, the bottom of the pyramid space, like Be Able. And they're really struggling to actually get the youth to pay, and our companies, of course, are not at all paying. So no one's even looking at that side.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that kind of discrepancies in the market. Who can bring a similarity? It's only the government who can bring a level playing field for all the players. Okay. Having said that, I would really say that, if you give a job in an organized sector to a youth who's underprivileged, you really take the whole family out of poverty in a sustained manner. So, this dilemma is there, I think, in everyone's mind. The government wants to do a greater good. Its aim is poverty alleviation. For example, in Bihar, when some of the training partners came and said that they want to charge the youth, everyone actually laughed because, the poverty levels are so low there, but because of the restriction of the kind of grant or loan they've taken, they have to see whether they can build a revenue model. So I'm saying, unless the ecosphere lays these conditions of similarity, you say, okay, bottom of the pyramid will all be free, okay, with a clear definition. Identification of bottom pyramid becomes a problem, but anyway, that kind. Next layer, everyone will have to pay. I think that kind of, similarity and a level playing field has to come. And only then will we be able to look at this.
And driven by the government, right?
Definitely.
Essentially. Ma'am, do you have any view on how for example, can something like this be started in Andhra as a pilot, saying government mandates, saying that, at these levels we pay, at these levels you won't pay, and there's some...
I think there are enough of those things already in place. I was myself shocked to see the textile industry and a variety of industries, when they come in and they are incentivized to come and set up their units in Andhra Pradesh. There are all these incentives going into them that, you employ so many people, per employee we pay so much. So and when we in fact train and place them, the employer receives that subsidy from the government. And then if he continues him for 6 months or 12 months, then he is entitled to fill that vacancy second time in case the candidate drops out. I think there are enough incentives in the form of so many tax benefits, this, that, and that. And there is also another aspect I always find it interesting. When we incentivize industry from a government point of view, in terms of land, tax benefits, so on and so forth, it's huge money going into, say, one person or one pocket. And when we talk about these people, thousands of them, it's huge money indeed, but going to several lakhs of people. So it's a much decentralized method of benefiting an individual than what we look at industry. Then there is another aspect. See, why such a wide range of services have become necessary? And a job itself should have solved one's problem. But why is it that we are forced to take up a pre-training counseling and then the post-placement follow-up in terms of so many things? Because job per se is not remunerative. So that is the crux of the issue. See, we have analyzed 1,10,000 placement data of this year. 3,000 to 6,000 is the 80% placement salary. So there are 10% jobs which are even less than 3,000, and they are below minimum wages. and they have a big explanation to offer to support their low wage structure. So if the job pays enough, there is no need for me to go and tell him that you get into this low cost accommodation, you do this, you do that, and all. That itself is an incentive for the person to stay out of the job. And no one would throw away a 10,000 rupee job or a 15,000 rupee job. And then there are also worsening, very adverse working conditions. If you see construction sites, you see textile industry, there are any such things. It's not only the duration of work or the shift hours, but it is also the sheer environment, the noise, the pollution, the dust, and there are a host of these factors which make this job very distressing after a period of time. It is really a problem that they cannot withstand beyond 3 months or 4 months, therefore they drop out. So the cycle continues. So I think that aspect is something which is very hard to.
So the government has no control. So actually, back to industry, the big culprit in this
It's
whole.
Especially at the entry level, I find that highly unjust also in a way. So you want to keep it as low as possible. Then there is such a big disparity in the wage structure of all employees. And most of the jobs you have at the entry level, and most of the problem lies there. And everyone is in a way has taken this as a target. That you employ somebody, after 3 months you get another batch, after 6 months you get another batch, you roll it over. And then there are so many other exploitative practices going on.
Can I just add
Yeah.
what ma'am said? Sorry?
Yeah.
I think an important area I find in the construction sector is that even after he gets the skill, quite often he doesn't shift to the organized sector. He's still in the unorganized sector. So this perceived value of skilling, and acceptance of it by the industry is also becoming important, especially in Bihar and Odisha. I find that the industry, even textile, I think, they are not paying more to a trained person versus an untrained. Okay, so if that happens, then how? So I think actually, Nimesh, next time you organize, I think you need to have a session on the industry perspective. We need to really.
It's coming out very, very strongly actually, and so I'm hoping that the
what
whole.
he said was important. The working conditions,
So we've got Sorry, Meera, that's a valid point. Rajesh, we've got 3 minutes left.
Okay. Can I
Just got, so then I'll come back, just.
See, I think Santi added some very interesting perspective to the debate of post-placement. So at best, maybe they'll be able to pay me 10% of my costs.
Correct.
And 90% I'll have to figure out how do I recover at least for next 1 decade or so.
Correct.
So that's a very interesting perspective. So let's not really hope much from the employers getting organized and wanting to drive this space.
Yeah, except that Jitendra, it has such a big impact on profitability.
Yeah,
private training companies.
It has.
That it is starting to impact bottom line so much that you take.
But I'm just telling you the market dynamics,
I understand.
and let's keep that in mind.
Absolutely right.
I think in the discourse it's been rightly said the absence of industry. But then in the previous session also and here also, otherwise normally when we see, the skilling is largely seen from the point of view of mainly the industry and the service sector. But a large section of our population is engaged in the primary sector. And then when it comes to skilling, one does not hear much about it because they also, and which is why a lot of youth from the rural areas are leaving their agriculture and coming because it's not very lucrative to them. So is it not possible to give skills to them so that they are able to increase their income levels? And also the existing people who are engaged in farming, they also have their needs. They need vets over there, they need para-vets over there, and which are services which they never get. But then, are we even thinking about it and talking about it?
That's the interesting area of self-employment, for example, that Rajesh touched upon, right? So agriculture is a classic case. I've got family's got fields, etc. So if you get into that area of training, you will self-employment will happen. You don't even create jobs actually. So that's of course
what happens in these cases, like if they are unskilled and they get 125 rupees per day, what we are looking at is with the skill intervention, can we move them to a 350 rupees per day? And they will be doing in terms of much productive work, but in the same line, construction or masonry or those things. This baseline data is what is the critical element. And that's the key thing. Today, I really get surprised when people talk 2 lakh, 3 lakh kind of a job and they have verified data. I mean, where are all those things? How can a painter give you a data point saying that I have got a job, or to, I'm not saying to EGMM or anybody, I mean, they say that we will track. It's difficult. It's so this kind of baseline data for an individual to become self-employed or be part of a work mastery or this, but his wage rate going up is a key indicator for us to measure. And we don't have any idea how to do it. So we are all grappling with that.
More questions than answers.
Sorry, yeah.
In a dynamic situation, we're looking at migration, we're looking at employment in the primary sector, agriculture, and then we're also looking at a liberalized economy, which is catching up. More and more private players are entering in many new areas. So I think it's in a dynamic situation, the questions that we are posing for ourselves also should be dynamic, not static.
So this is the starting point of, Nimesh, I remember saying what you were saying, can we just stop talking about problems all the time? So we just keep sitting here and we keep saying problems and we dwell into them. But there's a serious attempt being made to try and see whether amongst those 20 problems, there's one or two that that come up which can help us.
So there are certain things, sir. For example, in experience of Andhra Pradesh, the first month of the person coming from a rural area, the stay of that person is a big challenge.
Yeah.
Now, with all the infrastructure, with all the policies and all, we still are not able to answer that question.
Yeah, you're right. So that housing is the only point. You're absolutely right. That doesn't seem to get fully covered. In terms of the post-up. So Nimesh, we have the last.
I just wanted to ask is that tangibly, what are the things that we need to do? Basically, we have foundations that are willing to fund money for some interesting support infrastructure. We have NSDC, we have a few investors in this room, government, everyone's there. What I'm trying to ask is, if for example a grant-based support infrastructure has to be created, somebody in this room wants to take it up, what are the couple of things that each one of you think should be developed at a scale? Even if we start with one state like Andhra Pradesh, like is it counseling, telephone-based counseling, for example, for students about giving them career choices? Is it rental housing, setting up?
You want to take that?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that question. See, I think one important service that is absent in the ecosystem now, especially when we are dealing with this subject in a large scale, is absence of reliable information on jobs availability. So there are various studies done, and then they are all at a macro level. Someone says textile industry will go at this rate, but where are these textile mills and how many jobs are available at what levels and what skill level is required? So this centralized jobs registry, this is what we have been canvassing even with Government of India, that there has to be an effort for a short-term forecast of jobs, so that we can align our training effort to the jobs much more closely. Then there has to be, a reasonableness in so far as the wage structure is concerned. I think there has to be much stronger enforcement to deal with this problem of wages being less than minimum wages, so on and so forth. I think then the third important requirement is some of the sectors where there is a possibility of decentralization, like the BPO or some medical transcription. I think they must decentralize to smaller cities, smaller towns, which are closer to the rural areas. So these things will perhaps make the entire opportunity more available to everyone all over. And for an industry to decentralize to a tier 2, tier 3 cities, I think they need a lot of change in their mindset. I think these three things, if we can do, probably we will be able to make it much more.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've got to end the session.